The hook hit before the doors even opened. A retired Navy K-9 handler walks into a Denver grocery store on a Tuesday night, and his dog locks up solid. Not at a stranger, not at a smell, not at a sound. At an old man counting pennies at the checkout. 60 seconds later, Ethan Cross is watching a man in a black jacket cross the parking lot 3 times in 5 minutes, never going inside. And the old veteran at Register 4 isn't embarrassed about the money. His hands aren't shaking from cold. They're shaking because he knows someone outside is counting every second he takes. Ethan's dog didn't alert to a threat. She alerted to a target. If this story already has you leaning forward, stay with me until the very end. Like this video, subscribe so you don't miss what happens next, and drop a comment telling me what city or country you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. The automatic doors at Westfield Grocery on Larimer Street exhaled a gust of warm air into the freezing November dark, and Ethan Cross stepped inside with Lena at his left heel, her nails clicking once against the linoleum before she went quiet. That was the thing about Lena. 7 years working explosives detection with the Navy, and she never made noise she didn't intend to make. 4 years retired, and she still moved like she was on an op. Ethan grabbed a basket near the door. Protein bars, coffee, maybe something that wasn't gas station food for once. He was 3 days back in Denver after his sister's wedding in Portland, and his apartment had exactly 1 egg and a box of stale crackers. He wasn't planning to be in the store more than 15 minutes. He got as far as the bread aisle before Lena stopped. Not a hesitation, not a pause to sniff at something interesting. A full planted stop, all 4 legs braced, her brown eyes fixed on something 40 feet ahead at the checkout line. She didn't growl, didn't alert. She just looked, and when Lena looked at something that way, Ethan had learned a long time ago to follow her gaze before he did anything else. At Register 4, an old man was laying coins on the counter one by one. He was maybe 75, maybe older, the kind of lean that comes from years of it, not a diet. He wore a canvas jacket that had been good quality once, olive green with a fraying collar, and a navy ball cap pulled low. His hands were the first thing Ethan noticed beyond Lena's focus. They were shaking. Not a little. The kind of tremor that makes a coin slide sideways 3 times before you get it flat. The cashier, young woman, maybe 22, bored expression, was watching the man's hands with the particular patience of someone who had places to be. A woman in line behind the old man shifted her weight. Someone near the magazine rack coughed. Ethan watched for 10 seconds. Then he looked at the door. A man in a black jacket was standing in the parking lot just outside the glass. He wasn't on his phone. He wasn't smoking. He was standing with his hands in his pockets, facing the building, and he'd been there since Ethan walked in. Ethan had clocked him the moment he came through the doors. Not consciously, not deliberately, just the way you clock anything that's slightly wrong when 15 years of military service has wired your brain to register slightly wrong as a category separate from everything else. 3 minutes passed. The man didn't move, didn't check a phone, didn't look at his watch, just stood there in the cold watching the front of the store. Ethan set his basket down against the shelving unit and walked toward the checkout. He positioned himself 2 registers over, close enough to hear, and pretended to study the candy bar display. Lena sat beside him, still watching the old man. I think that's all of it, the man at Register 4 was saying. His voice had a steadiness underneath the softness, the kind of voice that had once given orders to people. Should be 417. The cashier counted the coins without expression. 411, she said. You're 6 cents short. 6 cents. The old man looked down at the counter like he was searching the coins for a mistake. His jaw tightened. He didn't reach for a pocket. He'd emptied them. He knew that. Here. Ethan was already moving, reaching past his own register to put a dollar bill on the man's counter. Keep the change. The old man looked up fast. That was the thing that lodged itself in Ethan's chest and didn't move for the rest of the night. The way the man looked up. Not grateful. Not relieved. Startled. Like someone reaching near him was a threat assessment first and a kindness second. I don't need charity, the man said, and his voice was sharp enough to have an edge. It's $1, Ethan said. and I'm holding up the line. The cashier bagged 2 cans of soup, a package of generic crackers, and a small jar of peanut butter. The old man picked up his bag without looking at Ethan again, but his hand came up briefly, so not quite a wave, something smaller than that, and he walked toward the exit. Lena watched him go. Then she looked at the door, at the man in the black jacket. Ethan was at the checkout for 30 seconds. He paid for his basket without looking at his receipt and walked outside 2 minutes after the old man. The parking lot at Westfield was half full. Fluorescent lights on poles cast yellow circles on wet asphalt, and the cold had a specific quality to it, dry and sharp, the way Denver cold got in November when the wind came down from the mountains without anything to stop it. Ethan's breath came out white. The man in the black jacket was gone from where he'd been standing. Ethan scanned the lot automatically, the way he always did entering any space. Exits, obstacles, positions. He found the old man near the far end of the lot walking toward a bus stop at the curb, his grocery bag swinging at his knee. And he found the black jacket 40 feet to the left, pacing along the edge of a row of parked cars, maintaining distance. Lena's ears were forward. Ethan kept walking, not toward either of them, just across the lot at an angle that would take him naturally past the bus stop. He didn't hurry. He didn't stare at the man in the black jacket. He had spent 3 years in environments where looking at the wrong thing at the wrong speed got people killed, and the skill hadn't left him. The old man sat down on the bench at the bus stop. He put his bag on his knee and looked at the street. His hands were still in his lap, and they were still shaking, but Ethan was close enough now to see what he hadn't seen inside. The man's jaw was set. That particular tight jaw expression of someone who knows something is behind them and has decided that turning around to look is the worst thing they can do. That isn't embarrassment, Ethan thought. That isn't cold, and it isn't tremor, and it isn't money trouble. That is someone who is afraid of a specific person and doing their best to look like they aren't. Ethan sat down on the far end of the bench. He set his grocery bag between his feet and looked at his phone like he was checking the time. "Next bus is about 20 minutes, the old man said without looking at him. "I'm not waiting for the bus." A pause. The old man's chin came up slightly. "Then what are you doing?" "Making sure that guy in the black jacket doesn't follow you onto it," Ethan said quietly, still looking at his phone. 3 seconds of silence. Then the old man exhaled. A long, careful exhale, like letting pressure out of something that had been sealed for a very long time. "You noticed him," the man said. "My dog noticed him first." The old man looked down at Lena, who was sitting at Ethan's feet with her gaze fixed on the far row of parked cars. He seemed to take a moment with that, a dog sitting at attention at a bus stop in a grocery store parking lot on a Tuesday night. "Walter Hayes," the man said finally. He didn't offer his hand. "Ethan Cross." Another silence. The kind that has weight in it. "How long has he been following you?" Ethan asked. Walter looked at the street. "What makes you think it's just one?" Tick. The bus came, and Ethan did not let Walter Hayes take it. He said it plainly. "If there's more than one of them out here tonight, you getting on a bus alone is not a good idea." Walter argued. Not loudly. The man wasn't a loud arguer, Ethan could tell, the kind of person who makes his case in flat sentences and expects to be heard without volume. He said he didn't need help. He said he'd been managing. He said he didn't know Ethan from anyone, and he had no reason to trust him. Ethan said, "I'm not asking you to trust me. I'm asking you to not get on a bus with someone behind you when you don't know where they'll get off." Walter looked at him for a long moment. Then he stood up and said, "There's a diner 2 blocks north that's open until midnight." They walked. Lena stayed at heel between them, which put her on Walter's left side, which Ethan noticed made the older man's shoulders drop by about a 1/4 inch. Whatever the dog had done, it had registered. The man in the black jacket followed for half a block and then peeled off down a side street. Ethan tracked him in his peripheral vision without adjusting his stride. He noted it and kept walking. The diner was called Brackett's, and it had the particular smell of every late-night diner Ethan had ever been in. Coffee and fryer oil and something sweet underneath, like syrup that had been on a warmer too long. A woman in her 50s with a gray braid and a tired expression seated them at a corner booth without being asked. She looked at Lena and said, "Service dog?" "Yes, ma'am," Ethan said. She put down 2 menus and left. Walter took off his hat and set it on the table. Without it, he looked older, or maybe just more visible. His hair was white and cut short, and there was a scar along his left jawline that was old enough to be fully silver. He had the particular posture of military service that never fully leaves, straight spine, squared shoulders, even in exhaustion. "Navy?" Ethan asked. Walter looked at the hat on the table between them. 31 years, E8, when I retired. He paused. "You?" 15 years. EOD, then K9 handling. Ethan nodded at Lena under the table. "She and I did 3 deployments together." Walter's expression shifted slightly. Not warmth exactly, but a kind of recognition. The specific recognition of one person knowing that another one has been somewhere real. "The man outside," Ethan said. "Who is he?" Walter looked at the menu. "What are you having?" "Walter." The older man put the menu down. He looked at his hands on the table, at the tremor that was still there, finer than it had been in the cold but present. He seemed to make a decision. "His name is Derek," he said. "I don't know his last name. I've never been given it." "What does Derek want from you?" "Money?" Walter's voice was flat. "Has been for about 7 months." Ethan kept his expression neutral. "How much?" "Started at $300 a month. Now it's $550, and he said this month it'll go to $8. Walter looked up, and his eyes were clear. Not confused, not broken, just tired the way you get tired of something you've been carrying for a very long time. "I get $1,400 a month in pension. I have a studio apartment on Colfax. $800 a month doesn't leave much for food." Ethan thought about the 6 cents at the checkout, the 2 cans of soup. "What does he have on you?" Ethan said. Walter was quiet. "He has to have something," Ethan said, not pushing it, just laying it flat. "Men like that don't get paid unless they have a lever." Walter looked at his hands again. "My son," he said. "He's 29. He got mixed up in something about 2 years ago. I don't know all of it, and I didn't ask all of it, because I knew if I asked all of it, I couldn't keep paying. Derek has documentation, enough to put my son in federal custody." He paused. "Or so he says." "What's your son's name?" "I'm not giving you his name." "Okay." Ethan didn't push it. "How did you meet Derek?" "I didn't meet him. He found me." Walter looked out the window at the dark street. "I was at the VFW post on Alameda, and one night this man sat down at the bar next to me. Friendly. Bought me a beer. Asked me questions about myself. Easy questions, nothing strange. Where had I served? What did I do after retirement? Did I have family in the city?" He stopped. 2 weeks later, he came to my apartment. The way he said it, matter of fact, no drama, made it worse somehow. The particular calm of someone who has replayed something so many times it's worn smooth. "And you went to the police," Ethan said. Walter looked at him with a flat expression that contained considerable volumes. "Once," Walter said, "the officer I spoke to told me I had no evidence, no documentation, and that what I was describing sounded like a private financial dispute. He told me to stop making payments and see if anything actually happened." A pause. 3 days later, Derek's associate came to my door and showed me photographs of my son from 2 days before, photographs that showed he was being watched. He picked up his coffee cup, seemed to remember it was empty, and set it down. I didn't go back to the police. The waitress came by. Ethan ordered coffee. Walter, after a moment, ordered the same. When she left, Ethan said, "He's done this before, not just to you." Walter looked at him. "The way he operates," Ethan said. "The VFW approach. Finding someone, being friendly, doing the research, then appearing at the apartment. That's not something you figure out in 7 months with one victim. That's a system." Walter was quiet for a long time. The diner hummed around them. Dishes somewhere in the back, a couple at the counter talking about a movie, the low sound of a radio tuned to something without words. "There was a man in my building," Walter said finally. "Raymond, Korean War. Well, his father, not him, but he wore his father's unit pin every day. Raymond died in September. They said it was a fall." He looked at his coffee. "He'd been different the last year, quiet in a way that wasn't like him. Didn't come to building events, stopped talking to his neighbors." He paused. "I don't know. I don't know anything about it, but he was about my age and he'd been alone and he stopped. Ethan waited. I didn't want to become Raymond, Walter said. Ethan drove Walter home in his truck, which Walter objected to for exactly 1 block before the exhaustion of the evening caught up with him, and he just sat in the passenger seat and looked out the window. Lena had her chin on the center console, which she didn't usually do with strangers, and Walter put his hand on her head once, without seeming to think about it. The building on Colfax was a 4-story walk-up with a buzzer panel and a lobby that smelled like industrial cleaner and old carpet. Ethan walked Walter to the 3rd floor. He didn't offer to come in, and Walter didn't offer to let him. At the door, Walter turned around. He looked at Ethan with the expression of a man assembling something he didn't have all the pieces for. You don't have to do anything, Walter said. I didn't ask you to. No, Ethan said. This isn't your situation. I know. Then why? Walter stopped. He looked at Lena. Why did your dog stop? Ethan looked down at her. She was sitting at his heel, looking up at Walter with calm, patient attention. Honestly? I don't always know what she picks up. I've stopped trying to figure it out and I've started trusting it. Walter considered that. He turned back to his door and found the key in his jacket pocket. Then he stopped again. There are others, he said, not looking back. In my building, I mean. Guzman on the 1st floor, he's a Vietnam-era vet, and he's been strange for months. And there's a woman, Harriet, retired Air Force, 2nd floor. She told me 2 months ago she was thinking about moving, which didn't make sense. She's been there 11 years. He paused. I can't prove anything, but when you know the look, you know the look. He went inside. Ethan stood in the hallway for a moment. Then he walked back down the stairs, out into the cold, and sat in his truck with the engine running while Lena settled in the back seat. He had his phone in his hand. He opened his contacts and scrolled to a name, Caleb Monroe, with a 210 area code, and looked at it for a while without pressing it. 7 months. 1 target that he knew of. 3 possibles in 1 building. A man named Derek, who had been organized enough to approach Walter at a VFW, build rapport, do research, and then convert a friendship into extortion without leaving enough evidence for a police report. Ethan pulled up the Maps app and searched for VFW halls in Denver. There were 4 within a reasonable radius. He thought about Walter's hands on the coins, about the 6th sense, about Raymond, who had died in September and been described as quiet in a way that wasn't like him. He thought about Derek in the parking lot, standing still in the cold, patient the way people are patient when they're not worried about being caught. He looked at Caleb's number again. Then he looked in the rearview mirror at Lena, who was curled in the back seat with her eyes half open, looking at him. Yeah, he said to her quietly. I know. He pressed the call button. It rang twice. Ethan. Caleb's voice was awake. Caleb was always awake. It was a personality trait. It's 11:15. I need to ask you something. You need to ask me something at 11:15 on a Tuesday. Are you still connected at JAG? A pause. Not the pause of someone confused, the pause of someone recalibrating the nature of the conversation. I know a few people, Caleb said carefully. Why? Because I think I've stumbled into something, and I need to know if what someone told me tonight is actually prosecutable before I start pulling threads. Another pause. Longer. How bad is it? Ethan looked through the windshield at the building on Colfax. The 3rd floor, 2nd window from the left, Walter's, had a light on. I don't know yet, Ethan said, but there's an old Navy E-8 on a fixed pension who's been paying $550 a month for 7 months to a man named Derek so that his son doesn't go to federal custody. And the guy who told me this thinks he's not the only one. Caleb was quiet for a moment. When he spoke again, his voice had dropped slightly. How old is the veteran? 75, maybe older. And you're trusting this why? Because Lena locked on him from 40 feet in a grocery store, and when I sat down next to him at a bus stop, he already knew I'd seen the tail. A long pause. Lena shifted in the back seat. Send me what you have, Caleb said finally. I don't have anything yet. That's why I'm calling. Then get some sleep and call me tomorrow when you have something. Caleb, get some sleep, Ethan. If this is what you think it is, It'll still be there in the morning, and you'll need your head for it." The call ended. Ethan sat in the truck a while longer. He looked at the building. He looked at Walter's window, where the light was still on at 11:22 on a Tuesday in November. He should have gotten on with his life. He knew that. He had 3 days of mail stacked up at home, an appointment at the VA on Thursday, and a freelance security assessment he'd been avoiding for 2 weeks. He had exactly no jurisdiction, no standing, and no clear plan. He put the truck in drive. He drove 2 blocks and stopped. Parked at the curb, engine on, was a dark blue sedan with its lights off. The man in the black jacket was in the driver's seat. He wasn't looking at the Colfax building. He was looking at his phone, but his position pointed at it like a compass. Ethan pulled out his phone and photographed the sedan. License plate, make, position. He got 3 photos from different angles without leaving the truck. Then he drove past without looking at the driver, turned at the next intersection, and pulled over half a block down. His hands were steady on the wheel, which was the thing about the way he was wired. Adrenaline didn't shake his hands, it focused them. It was something his commanding officer had identified early in his career and described once tersely as a useful quality that will get you in trouble if you don't respect it. He looked at the photos of the sedan on his phone. He looked at the plate. He thought about Walter Hayes at the coin sorting machine of Register 4, putting everything he had on a counter and coming up 6 cents short. He thought about Derek in the cold, patient and still, not worried about being caught. Then Ethan Cross made a decision that he knew, even as he made it, was going to cost him several things he hadn't budgeted for: time, sleep, and the careful, quiet life he'd been trying to rebuild in Denver since he left the Navy. He opened his notes app and started typing. He wrote down everything Walter had said, in order, as precisely as he could remember it. He wrote down the VFW detail, the methodology, the reference to Raymond on the 3rd floor, Guzman on the 1st, Harriet on the 2nd. He wrote down the plate from the sedan. He noted the time at every transition of the evening. When he was done, he read it back to himself once. Then he saved it, put his phone face down on the passenger seat, and sat for a moment in the dark. 3 blocks away, in an apartment on Colfax, a 75-year-old Navy veteran with shaking hands and 2 cans of soup had a light on at 11:30 at night. And there was a man in a dark sedan on his street who didn't seem to be going anywhere. Ethan picked his phone back up and found his old colleague Ryan Maddox in his contacts. Ryan was a former Marine MP who now worked private investigations out of Fort Collins, which was 90 minutes north, set close enough to matter. He started a text. "Need a favor. License plate run if you still have access. Also, are you free this week?" He sent it, set the phone down. Outside, the Denver cold pressed against the windows, and in the back seat, Lena made the small sound she made when she was settling in for something long, arranging herself quietly in the dark. The light in Walter's window went out at 11:47. The sedan didn't move. The sedan was still there at 6:14 in the morning. Ethan knew because he'd slept in his truck. Not planned. He'd meant to drive home. Meant to get 6 hours and come back clear-headed the way Caleb had told him to. But somewhere around midnight, he'd reclined the seat back 2 notches and closed his eyes for what he told himself was 10 minutes. And when he opened them again, the sky over Colfax was the particular gray-purple of early Denver winter morning, and Lena was pressing her nose against the side window with a focused interest that meant she needed to go outside. He got out, walked her to the nearest patch of dead grass at the edge of the lot, and stood in the cold with his hands in his jacket pockets while she did what she needed to do. His neck ached from the seat angle. His coffee from last night was a cold cup in the cup holder. The sedan was parked in the same spot it had been at midnight, and now there were 2 figures in the front instead of 1. They'd switched shifts sometime in the night. Ethan walked Lena back to the truck, gave her water from the bottle he kept behind the seat, and stood leaning against the driver's door looking at the building. Walter's window was dark. It was 6:15 on a Wednesday morning, and a 2-person surveillance team had been parked outside a 75-year-old veteran's apartment building all night on a Tuesday. That wasn't a low-level shakedown. That was infrastructure. His phone buzzed. Ryan Maddox had texted back at 5:52, which was Ryan's version of a reasonable hour. Plate registered to an LLC. Meridian Consulting Group, Denver address incorporated 14 months ago. Want me to dig? Then, 30 seconds later. Also, yes, I'm free Thursday. What's this about? Ethan typed. Dig as far as you can. I'll call you at 8. He got back in the truck. He turned the heat on and sat there while it worked up to something useful, looking at the sedan and thinking about LLC and corporation timelines. 14 months. The LLC was 14 months old. Walter said Derek had found him at the VFW bar about 2 years ago. Friendly, easy, a beer and some questions. And then 2 weeks later, he'd appeared at the apartment. So the approach period predated the corporate structure. That meant either Derek had been operating under a different shell before Meridian, or the friendly beer and questions phase was personal, and the corporate structure came later when the operation grew large enough to need it. Either way, it had grown. Ryan called at 7:45 because Ryan had never in his life waited for the exact time something was scheduled. The LLC is thin, he said without preamble. 2 registered agents, both names are garbage. One of them is a guy who shows up as a registered agent in about 40 other LLCs across Colorado and Wyoming, which means he's a professional placeholder, not an actual person involved in the business. The address is a mail forwarding service on South Broadway. No employees on record, no business filings beyond the basic state requirements. Any money movement you can get to? Not without someone with more clearance than me, Ryan said. But I found something interesting at the county level. Meridian Consulting Group is listed as a property manager for 6 residential buildings in Denver. All of them are older buildings, affordable housing range. All of them have high percentages of senior tenants. Ethan was quiet for a moment. Property management. On paper, which means they have a legal reason to interact with residents, to know who lives there, to have access to the building rosters. A pause. Ethan, if someone wanted to identify vulnerable senior veterans in multiple buildings systematically, they'd just become the property manager, Ethan said. It's a clean pipeline. Ryan's voice had gone careful. How big do you think this is? I don't know yet. Walter Hayes mentioned 2 other tenants in his building alone who fit the pattern. Multiply that by 6 buildings. That's not a side hustle. That's a business. Ethan looked at the sedan. It hadn't moved. I need to meet you Thursday, he said, and I need you to bring everything you have on Meridian. I'll be there. A pause. You sleeping in your truck right now? No. You sound like you slept in your truck. Drive safe, Ryan. He ended the call and immediately opened his contacts and pressed Caleb Monroe. Caleb picked up on the first ring. You slept in your truck. I have a plate tied to an LLC that manages 6 senior housing buildings in Denver, Ethan said. Meridian Consulting Group, 14 months old, shell-registered agents, mail drop address. Silence. Then, that's not nothing. No. Send me the LLC name. I'll make a call. Another pause. Ethan, if this is organized to the level you're describing, you can't walk it into a precinct with a notepad. You need someone who's already looking at something adjacent, or you need enough documentation that they can't ignore it. I know. Do you know a detective anybody at Denver PD? Ethan thought about it. He knew 2 people at Denver PD, and neither of them were detectives, but he knew someone who might know someone. Let me work on that, he said. Can you get me anything on Meridian from your end? I'll see what the JAG connection knows, Caleb said. And Ethan, you need to not be parked outside that building all day. If they made you last night, they didn't make me. You don't know that. Ethan looked at the sedan. I'll move, he said. He moved 3 blocks, found a coffee shop that was open, ordered an actual coffee and a breakfast sandwich that he ate standing at the counter, and was back in a different position with a different sightline by 8:30. Close enough to see if Walter came out of the building. Far enough that the sedan wasn't in his direct eye line, and he wasn't in theirs. He hadn't planned to become Walter Hayes' surveillance detail. That was a thing that had simply happened, the way certain things happened when your nervous system was calibrated a particular way, and you couldn't uncalibrate it. Walter came out at 9:40. He was dressed in his canvas jacket and his navy hat, and he carried himself differently in the morning light than he had at the grocery store. Straighter, more deliberate. He stood at the building's front door for a moment and looked at the street in each direction with a casualness that wasn't casual at all. Then he turned and walked south. The The sedan pulled out 30 seconds later and followed at a distance. Ethan gave it a beat and pulled out after them. Walter walked 4 blocks to a small park with benches and dead winter grass and a walking path that circled a frozen fountain. He sat on a bench facing the path and opened a paperback that he'd pulled from his jacket pocket, which, Ethan thought, watching from 50 meters away at the edge of the park, was either a man genuinely wanting to read in the cold or a man creating an excuse to sit in a public place with wide sightlines. The sedan parked at the curb. Neither person inside got out. Ethan parked on the opposite side of the park and let Lena out for the path. She walked at heel beside him, nose low, interested in the dead grass and the cold air, and they made 2 slow circuits of the path that brought them close enough to Walter's bench that a wave of the hand was natural. Walter looked up from his book. His expression didn't change in any visible way, but he shifted slightly on the bench and left space at the far end of it. Ethan sat. Lena investigated a nearby bush. "You stayed," Walter said, eyes on his book. "Sedan switched crew at some point in the night," Ethan said. "2 people in it now." Walter turned a page he hadn't read. "I know. The overnight one is a young man, early 20s, drives a gray jacket. The morning one is a woman, mid-30s. She drives." You've cataloged them." "I've had 7 months to pay attention." He paused. "I can't do anything with what I know. Knowing isn't the same as having proof, and proof is the only thing that matters to anyone official. I have a colleague looking at the LLC behind their vehicle registration," Ethan said, "and another one with contacts at JAG." Walter was quiet for a moment. "You called in people." "Last night." Walter looked up from the book then, actually looked at him, not at the park or the sedan or the cold sky. He had dark eyes with a stillness in them that came from a long time of not showing what he was feeling to people who didn't deserve to see it. "Why?" Walter asked. It was a genuine question, not ungrateful, just genuinely asking why a stranger would call in favors at 11 at night on his behalf. Ethan thought about how to answer that honestly, without making it into something larger than it was. "Because what you described isn't something one person can fix, and I happen to know the right people to help fix it." Walter held his gaze for a moment. Then he looked back at his book. "Guzman on the first floor," he said. "His name is Antonio. He went to the VA last week and didn't tell anyone he was going, but when he came back he had a bruise on his left forearm that he said was from bumping a door." Pause. "Antonio Guzman played semi-pro baseball until he was 34. He knows where his arms are in space." Ethan absorbed that. "And Harriet," Walter continued, "Harriet Okafor, retired Air Force. She told me she was thinking about moving because the building had gotten too expensive. She's been there 11 years. The rent hasn't changed in 3 years because of the city's rate control." He paused. "She's not moving because of the rent." "She's moving because she wants out of whatever she's in," Ethan said, "and she thinks moving is the way to get out." Walter closed his book on his finger. "It isn't. Derek told me once, early on, that it doesn't matter where I go. He said that like he wanted me to know it, like it was information he was giving me as a courtesy." His voice stayed level. He wasn't being kind. He was closing a door. Ethan looked at the sedan across the park. The woman in the driver's seat was on her phone. "I need you to do something for me," Ethan said. "I need you to see if Harriet and Antonio will talk to me. Not today, not formally, just a conversation. Introduce me as a friend. They'll want to know who you are. Tell them what you know. Navy, K9. I'm not police." Walter considered it for a long moment. "Harriet will be home this afternoon. Antonio, I can't promise." He stood up, tucked the book back in his pocket. "Don't follow me back. Give it 10 minutes. He walked back toward Colfax without looking at the sedan or at Ethan. The sedan pulled out after a moment and followed him, and Ethan sat on the bench with his hands on his knees in the cold, watching them go. He counted 10 minutes. He didn't need to count. He had a reliable internal clock from years of timed operations, but he counted anyway because it was something concrete to do while everything else was moving too fast to hold. He met Harriet Okafor at 3 in the afternoon in Walter's apartment, which was precisely the size of what it was. A studio that had been lived in thoughtfully by someone with very little space to work with. A folded map of the Pacific on one wall, a shelf of paperbacks, a kitchen table with two mismatched chairs, and a third one Walter had clearly borrowed from somewhere. Harriet was 68, former Air Force logistics, and she came into the apartment with the particular energy of someone who had decided to be fine and was working hard at it. She shook Ethan's hand firmly, assessed Lena with brief interest, and sat down at the table like she had somewhere to be. "Walter says you're not a cop," she said. "I'm not. But you have contacts." "Some." She looked at him with an expression that reminded him of his first female commanding officer. The look of someone who has been underestimated in professional settings long enough to have developed a very precise assessment process. "What do you need from me?" "Whatever you want to tell me," Ethan said, "and whatever you don't want to tell me, you don't have to." Something in that approach seemed to take her slightly off guard, like she'd braced for something more demanding. She glanced at Walter, who was standing at his small kitchen counter and not pretending not to listen. "His name is Derek Voss," she said. "He told me his last name once, which I think was a mistake. He's in his mid-40s, maybe 45, 46, about 6'1", heavy-set, but not soft." She said this with the matter-of-fact precision of someone who had mentally cataloged everything they could as a form of control. "He showed up at my door 7 months ago with a property management form and asked me to sign a new occupancy agreement because of some administrative change with the building ownership. I signed it. I didn't read it carefully enough." A pause. "There was language in it that I didn't understand, and I've since had reason to think it wasn't a standard occupancy agreement at all." "What kind of language?" Ethan asked. "Language that seemed to give Meridian Consulting access to my financial information as part of their management responsibilities." She folded her hands on the table. "And then, about 3 weeks after I signed it, Derek came back. He had a copy of a debt I thought was resolved. A medical debt from 6 years ago, after my husband died. There were accounts in both our names, and settling the estate was complicated. I thought it was all handled. Derek said it wasn't. He said Meridian had acquired the debt and was prepared to pursue collection through the courts, which would affect my credit and potentially my ability to remain in the building." She said this calmly, in the way people are calm when they have run out of the energy to be anything else. "He offered me an arrangement," she said, "monthly payments directly to him, and the debt wouldn't be pursued." "But the debt may not exist," Ethan said. "I don't know if it exists, that's the point. I can't verify it without hiring a lawyer, and I can't afford a lawyer. If I try to contest it, he's threatened to accelerate the process." She looked at her hands. "I tried once. I called a legal aid office. They said it would take 8 to 12 weeks to get to me, and in the meantime I shouldn't make any statement to the creditor." She stopped. "I'm still on that waiting list. It's been 4 months. Well, Ethan thought about the legal aid detail. That was known. Someone had told Derek's people how to pace their pressure to just fast enough to feel urgent, just slow enough that official channels couldn't catch up. "He's done this before," Harriet said. It wasn't a question. "We think so, yes. How many?" "We don't know yet. We're working on it." He paused. "Did you ever see him with anyone else? Associates? People who came with him?" "Once. A younger man, dark jacket, which I've since learned parks outside the building. And once there was a woman with him, professional looking. She didn't speak. She just stood there." Harriet's jaw tightened slightly. "I think she was there to see how I reacted, like she was evaluating something." Ethan filed that. "A professional-looking woman who observed and evaluated." "That was not muscle, that was management." "Derek Voss is not the top of this," Ethan said. Walter's voice came from the kitchen, quiet and without surprise. "I know." "I know too," Harriet said. "He's too comfortable. Men who are really running something look scared sometimes, even when they're threatening you. Derek never looks scared." She met Ethan's eyes. "Which means he knows there's something above him that's insulated him." Outside, a door opened and closed in the hallway. They all went quiet for half a second, a reflex, and then Harriet straightened her spine and looked at her hands, and Ethan recognized the specific thing that was happening in this room. 3 people in a situation they hadn't chosen, in different stages of something they'd been carrying alone, suddenly in the same place at the same time. It was fragile. He didn't want to put weight on it. I need to make some calls, Ethan said. It may take a day or two to get the right people oriented. Can you both keep doing what you've been doing? Normal routine, normal payments, nothing that would signal a change? I've been doing that for 7 months, Walter said dryly. I know, just a little longer. Harriet stood up. She put her hand briefly on the table like she was steadying herself, though she didn't look unsteady. What's the actual plan? She said. Not the part where you call people. After that. I don't have all of it yet, Ethan said honestly. She nodded, like that was the right answer. Good. I've seen people overclaim. It always goes wrong when they overclaim. She picked up her jacket. I'll talk to Antonio Guzman tonight. He trusts me more than he'd trust a stranger. She looked at Lena. Your dog is well behaved. She's better behaved than I am, Ethan said. Something almost like a smile crossed Harriet's face and didn't quite finish. She left. Walter watched the door close. He stood in his kitchen with his hands at his sides and looked at the wall map of the Pacific for a moment, like he was finding something specific on it. You said you needed the right people oriented, he said. What does that mean? It means I need someone at Denver PD who's been looking at organized financial crime, Ethan said. Someone who can take what Ryan finds on the LLC and run it through actual channels. And it means I need Caleb to figure out whether the JAG angle gives us any jurisdiction on the military pension side. And if PD doesn't want it, then we find someone who does. Ethan stood up and clipped Lena's lead. But first I need to find out if a Detective Maya Sterling will take my call. Walter turned from the map. Who's that? Someone Caleb knows through a mutual contact. She's been working financial exploitation cases in Denver for 3 years. He paused. If she's looking at the right area, she might already have a corner of this. He left Walter's apartment and took the stairs down, Lena at heel, and pushed out through the lobby door onto Colfax. The late afternoon had gone gray, and the wind had picked up, carrying the smell of snow from somewhere west. And the dark blue sedan was parked 50 meters down the block where it had been all day. Ethan pulled out his phone and called Caleb. I have a name, he said when Caleb answered. Derek Voss, mid-40s, 6'1", works under Meridian Consulting, and I need the Sterling contact today, not tomorrow. What changed? He used a fraudulent occupancy agreement to extract financial information from at least one tenant. He may have manufactured a debt to use as leverage. That's not just extortion, that's wire fraud territory. A pause on the line. Then Caleb said, Give me an hour. Ethan walked back toward his truck. He was 3 steps from it when his phone buzzed with a text from Ryan. Found something. Meridian has a second LLC above it, older, registered in Wyoming. And Ethan, the second LLC has a different registered agent, a real person. Her name is listed as V. Harlow. Ethan stopped walking. And here's the thing, Ryan's next text read, V. Harlow has a law license in Colorado, still active. Specialty, financial services. The wind off the mountains had turned sharp and cold. Lena stood at Ethan's heel, looking down the block at the sedan, and Ethan stood on the sidewalk looking at his phone, reading Ryan's messages a second time. A lawyer. There was a lawyer at the top of the structure above the LLC, above Derek Voss, running financial services as a registered agent for the shell company that owned Meridian Consulting Group, which managed 6 buildings full of elderly veterans, which had given a man named Derek access to their records and their doors and their lives. This was not a side operation. This was not Derek being entrepreneurially criminal. This was a constructed system. Someone had built it deliberately, with legal cover and corporate structure and a management pipeline that put them close enough to their targets to make them impossible to avoid. He was still looking at his phone when a sound made him look up. Down the block, the sedan's door had opened. Not the driver's side, the passenger side. A figure got out. Not the woman, not the young man Walter had described. A third person. Taller. In a gray wool coat, no hat. Stood for a moment looking at the building, then looked directly down the block. Directly at Ethan. Not a glance. Not a casual survey of the street. Deliberate. Held. The kind of look that means, I see you and I'm deciding something. Ethan didn't move. Didn't look away. held it. The figure in the gray coat reached back into the sedan, pulled something from the seat, and walked. Not toward Ethan, but toward the building entrance. Pressed the buzzer, waited. The door opened. They went inside. Ethan was already moving. He took the stairs. Not running. He knew better than to run, knew that someone watching the lobby from a camera or through a door crack would clock a running man before they'd clock a walking one. He went up at a pace that looked purposeful rather than urgent. Lena tied at his left, and he had his phone out and was already texting Walter before he hit the second-floor landing. Someone just went in your building. Gray coat, not the usual 2. Which floor is Harriet? The reply came back in under 30 seconds. Second floor 2C. What's happening? Ethan didn't answer that yet. He reached the second floor and pushed through the stairwell door carefully, letting it swing wide enough to see the hallway before he stepped into it. The figure in the gray coat was standing in front of 2C, not knocking. Standing, like they were listening first. Ethan came through the door at a walk, and the figure turned. And it was a woman, late 40s, dark hair pulled back, the kind of professional presentation that read as deliberate rather than habitual. The woman from Harriet's description, the one who had come with Derek once and stood in the background and observed. She looked at Ethan, at Lena, then back at Ethan with an expression that was mostly neutral but had something in it, not fear, not aggression, assessment. "Can I help you?" Ethan said, which was a sentence that could mean several different things depending on what came after it. "I'm looking for a resident," the woman said. Her voice was measured, practiced. "Which resident?" She looked at the door of 2C. "That's not your concern." "Building like this, people look out for each other," Ethan said. "I'm a friend of a few people on this floor." She studied him. Her eyes went to Lena again, the vest, the way the dog was sitting at position without being told. She was reading information from that. He could see her doing it, recalibrating. "You were outside," she said, on the sidewalk. "I was. You've been outside since last night." He didn't confirm or deny it. He looked at the door of 2C and then back at her. "I think the person in that apartment isn't available right now," he said. The woman was quiet for a moment. Something shifted in her expression. Not anger, something colder than anger. The look of someone making a decision about a timeline. "You're making a mistake," she said. "Probably," Ethan said. "I've made them before." She held the look for another 3 seconds. Then she walked back toward the elevator without hurrying, without looking back. He watched her until the elevator doors opened and closed. He knocked on 2C. Harriet opened it in under 10 seconds, which meant she'd been standing near the door. Her expression was the particular stillness of someone who has just heard something they weren't supposed to hear. "Was that her?" Ethan said quietly. "Yes." Harriet stepped back to let him in. "She's never come alone before. Derek always sends the young man or comes himself. She's only been here once." She crossed her arms over her chest. "What does it mean that she came alone?" Ethan thought about the sedan, the third person, the timing. Harriet's conversation with him in Walter's apartment had ended less than an hour ago. "It means they know something changed," he said. "Not what, just that something did." Harriet sat down on her couch. She looked at her hands in her lap and then back up at him with the particular look of someone who has run a logistics operation and understands what a compressed timeline feels like. "So we have less time than you thought." "Yes." "How much less?" "I don't know. But I need to make a call right now, and I need you to not open this door for anyone until I tell you otherwise." He paused. "Can you reach Antonio Guzman tonight? I told you I'd talk to him. Tonight, not tomorrow. And tell him the same thing. Door closed. Don't talk to anyone from management." She nodded once, sharp. Ethan stepped back into the hallway and called Caleb. Caleb picked up and started talking before Ethan could. "Sterling will call you in 20 minutes. She says she has something adjacent and she wants to hear what you have." A pause. "What happened?" "They sent someone new to Harriet Okafor's door tonight. A woman, professional, not the usual crew. She knows something's changed in their target pool." "That means Derek knows. Or Harlow does." Ethan was moving back toward the stairs as he talked. "Ryan found a name above the LLC. V. Harlow. Licensed attorney, financial services. She's the registered agent for the parent company. A beat of silence. You think Harlow sent the woman tonight? I think Derek doesn't make that kind of call on his own. I think someone above him decided to do a check-in when the surveillance reported something irregular. He hit the stairwell. 20 minutes on Sterling? Maybe less. She moves fast. He went back down the stairs and out onto Colfax. The sedan was gone. That was new, and it was not reassuring. The sedan being gone meant the woman in the gray coat had either been the priority for tonight, or they'd pulled surveillance because they wanted the building to feel unmonitored. He didn't trust the second option. His phone rang 14 minutes later. Unknown number, Colorado area code. Ethan Cross? A woman's voice, clipped, professional, but with an alertness underneath it like someone who ran on 4 hours of sleep and had made peace with that. Yes. Detective Maya Sterling, Denver PD, Financial Crimes. Caleb Monroe said you have something I should hear. A pause. I also ran your name while I was waiting, and I know your service record, so you can skip the part where you establish credibility. Appreciated, Ethan said. Meridian Consulting Group, she said. Talk. He talked. He gave her Ryan's findings on the LLC structure, Harriet's account of the fraudulent occupancy agreement, Walter's 7 months of payments, the parent company registered to V. Harlow, the surveillance pattern outside the building, and the woman in the gray coat showing up within an hour of his conversation with the victims. Sterling didn't interrupt. When he finished, there was a pause that lasted long enough that he checked to make sure the call was still connected. I have 4 open cases, she said finally. Elderly victims, financial exploitation, all living in affordable housing in the metro area. 3 of the 4 buildings are managed by a company called Halcyon Property Partners. A pause that meant something. Which I've been trying to connect to a shell structure for 6 months without enough to move on. Ethan stopped walking. Halcyon. Halcyon Property Partners and Meridian Consulting Group are not the same LLC, Sterling said. But if your Ryan Maddox found a parent company registered in Wyoming above Meridian, I would be very interested to know whether that parent company also has a relationship with Halcyon. How fast can you find that out? Faster than you can. A short pause. I need to meet you. Tomorrow morning, 7 a.m. Bring your documentation. Bring your source contacts if they'll consent to speak with me. Another pause. And Mr. Cross, the woman in the gray coat, I need a physical description, everything you have. He gave it to her. She thanked him without warmth, but with a precision that was its own kind of respect, and ended the call. Ethan stood on Colfax in the dark and exhaled a breath that came out white in the cold. 6 months. Sterling had been working toward this for 6 months, and she was missing the LLC connector. Ryan had found the Wyoming parent company in less than 12 hours with property records and a name. And Walter Hayes had been paying Derek Voss for 7 months, while 4 of Sterling's cases sat open and unconnected. He called Ryan. I need you to look at something else tonight, he said. A company called Halcyon Property Partners. Same kind of search, LLC structure, registered agents, any common officers with Meridian or the Wyoming parent. Can you do it tonight? I was going to sleep, Ryan said. Ryan, I'll call you in 2 hours, Ryan said, and hung up. He didn't sleep. He went to a 24-hour diner near his apartment, the kind of place with orange booths and a coffee carafe that a waitress named Dee refilled without being asked. And he sat in the back with his notebook and his phone and Lena under the table, and he organized everything he had into something that would make sense to Sterling in the morning without needing explanation. Ryan called at 11:48. Halcyon and Meridian have different structures on paper, Ryan said, and his voice had the particular flatness of someone who had been reading corporate filings for 2 hours and found something that canceled out his desire to be casual about it. Different states, different registered agents, but the Wyoming parent company, the one above Meridian, the one with Harlow as the registered agent, I found a filing amendment from 8 months ago that added a second registered agent. Who? A man named Thomas Breck. And Thomas Breck is also a registered agent for Halcyon Property Partners in Colorado. A pause. Same guy, both companies, which means the Wyoming parent sits above both Meridian and Halcyon. Ethan looked at his notepad. So Meridian and Halcyon are parallel operations, both feeding up to the same umbrella, different management structures, different faces in each building, but the same legal backbone. Ryan's voice went flat. And Ethan, the Wyoming parent company was incorporated 3 years ago, not 14 months. 3 years. Which means this started before Meridian, before Halcyon, before Derek Voss was driving around Denver in a blue sedan. 3 years. Ethan did the math without wanting to. 3 years of operation, 6 buildings under Meridian, however many under Halcyon V, Harlow as the legal architect at the top, and Sterling had 4 cases and 6 months of trying to connect the structure. Send me everything you have on Breck, Ethan said. And can you be in Denver tomorrow? I'll be there at 6, Ryan said. Don't make me regret this. Sterling arrived at the coffee shop at 6:58 a.m. with a leather satchel over one shoulder and the look of someone who had already run 3 miles and had 2 meetings before this one. She was 41 or 42, dark-skinned, short natural hair, and she moved with the specific economy of someone who didn't have time for anything decorative, including introductions. She sat down, looked at Ethan, looked at Lena, looked at Ryan, and said, "Which one of you found Breck?" "He did," Ethan said, nodding at Ryan. She looked at Ryan. "Good work." She opened her satchel and put a thin folder on the table. "Here's what I have. 4 victims, all female, all over 65. 3 of them in Halcyon-managed buildings. The 4th is in a building that doesn't have a management company on record, which I now suspect means the management company is obscured." She slid the folder toward them. "One of my 4 victims died 4 months ago, ruled natural causes. She was 69, she had a heart condition, and her daughter reached out to me last week because she found correspondence that suggested her mother had been paying an unnamed creditor $300 a month for a year." She paused. "No corresponding debt on record." The table was quiet for a moment. "The woman in the gray coat," Ethan said. "Any chance she's Harlow?" "The physical description you gave me doesn't match the bar photo I have for a V. Harlow on the Colorado State Bar website," Sterling said. "Gray coat could be another layer of management between Harlow and the building-level operations." She looked at the folder. "Harlow is careful. The legal structure is very careful. 3 years without a direct connection to the exploitation activity, that's intentional. She's insulated Derek and the Halcyon-level operators from any trace back to her," Ryan said. "Which is also a defense strategy," Sterling said. "When this goes to prosecution, she'll claim she had no knowledge of the extortion. She'll point to the LLC structure and say she's a passive registered agent. We need something that puts her in the operational loop." "The woman in the gray coat," Ethan said. "She's the connection between Harlow and the building level." Sterling looked at him. "Probably, and right now I don't know who she is." Ethan thought about the way the woman had looked at him in the hallway. Not the look of field muscle, the look of someone who was there because they needed first-hand information and didn't trust second-hand reports. "She came to assess the situation personally," he said, "which means she has standing in the organization. She makes decisions." "I need to identify her," Sterling said, "and I need to do it before Derek Voss changes his pattern because whatever flagged them last night is still flagged." Ethan said, "I can get Harriet Okafor to do a photo lineup if you can put one together." Sterling looked at him with an expression that was the professional version of, "I was already planning that, but thank you." "I'll have it by noon." She stood up. "I'm going to pursue the Harlow-Breck connection through my channels. I need your source documentation. Ryan's LLC research, the plate, all of it. So it's in the official file and admissible." Ryan slid a folder across the table. "I put it together last night." Sterling picked it up. She looked between the two of them. "This doesn't become your operation," she said, and her voice had an edge in it that wasn't hostile but wasn't soft either. "I appreciate the work. I understand why you did it. But from this morning forward, you do not approach Voss. You do not attempt to document anything without me knowing, and you do not make contact with the Wyoming entity or with Harlow in any form." She held Ethan's gaze specifically. "I mean that." "I know you do," Ethan said. "Good." She picked up her satchel. "I'll call you at noon about the photo lineup." She left, and the door of the coffee shop closed behind her with the particular sound of someone who doesn't slam doors but closes them with purpose. Ryan looked at Ethan. "She's good." Yes, she is. Ethan looked at his coffee. She's also right. About what specifically? That we're not running this anymore. He paused. Which means we need to make sure Walter and the others are documented before someone has a reason to make them unavailable. Ryan sat forward. You think they'd move on the victims? If they know the structure is being looked at and they need to slow things down, yes. Intimidation, relocation pressure, accelerated collection activity. Any of those would disrupt witness availability. He was already pulling out his phone. I need to talk to Walter and Harriet today. Get them connected to Sterling formally, on record. He called Walter while Ryan ordered more coffee. Walter answered on the second ring, and Ethan walked him through the morning's meeting in short, clear sentences. The detective, the file, the plan to formalize their accounts. Walter was quiet through all of it. When? Walter said, when Ethan finished. Today, if possible. Sterling will contact you through me. A pause. Walter, I also need you to check on Antonio Guzman this morning. I was planning to. A pause. Why this morning specifically? Because the woman in the gray coat came to your building last night, and I don't know if she only went to Harriet's door. Silence on the line. I'll go now, Walter said, and hung up. Well, Antonio Guzman was 66 years old, and when Walter knocked on the door of 1B at 8:15 in the morning, it took 4 minutes for him to answer, which was not normal for a man who had told Walter last week that he woke at 6 every morning without an alarm because 60 years of routine didn't stop at retirement. He opened the door with his left arm slightly behind him, and the way he was standing, weight shifted to the right, left side angled back, made Walter think of the bruise on the forearm and what Ethan had said about baseball players knowing where their arms were. You okay? Walter said. Antonio looked at him with the particular expression of a man deciding whether to lie. He was built broadly across the shoulders, with close-cut gray hair and a face that had weathered things without collapsing under them. He had a stillness that in other contexts might read as calm. Right now it read as someone managing pain. Fine, Antonio said. The woman came last night, Walter said. The one in the gray coat. You know who I mean. Antonio's expression didn't change, but the door opened a little wider. Yeah, he said. She came. To your door? About 11:30. He looked at the hallway over Walter's shoulder. She didn't knock. I heard her out there and I didn't open it. She stood outside for a few minutes and then left. He paused. Walter, I got a letter yesterday from Derek. Said the payment this month was increasing by $250. Walter thought about Ethan Cross in Walter's kitchen the evening before, about the photo of the sedan, the license plate, Ryan's research into the LLC structure, about Detective Sterling with her leather satchel and her 6 months of open cases. He thought about telling Antonio about all of it. Come upstairs, Walter said. I need you to meet someone. Caleb Monroe arrived in Denver at noon with a carry-on bag and the kind of alertness that suggested he'd been running on coffee and purpose since before dawn. He was 43, former special ops, currently working as a government contractor in a capacity he was selectively specific about, and he had the physical presence of someone whose baseline setting was ready. He walked into Ethan's apartment, assessed the room in about 4 seconds, looked at the whiteboard Ethan had put up on the wall with the LLC structure, and the names and the arrows, and said, Ryan's cleaner than I thought. He's good, Ethan said. Caleb pulled up a chair. My JAG contact pulled something this morning. He set his phone on the table. Military pension disbursements for veterans in Colorado. There's a flag that went up about 8 months ago in a fraud monitoring program. A pattern of pension recipients making repeated electronic transfers of similar amounts to accounts traced back to shell payment processors. Ethan looked at him. How many? Flagged accounts across Colorado, Arizona, and Wyoming, 47. Ryan, at the kitchen counter, set his mug down. 47, Ethan said. That's just the ones the monitoring program caught, Caleb said. The ones who paid cash or through money orders or through direct arrangements that didn't hit a banking flag, those wouldn't show up. He paused. The JAG analyst I spoke to said the pattern looked like a managed operation and she'd been trying to get traction on it for 4 months. She didn't have a corporate name or a geographic anchor point. She had transaction patterns. He looked at the whiteboard. We just gave her both. The room was quiet. 47 flagged. An unknown additional number unflagged. 6 buildings under Meridian, unknown number under Halcyon. A Wyoming parent with 3 years of operational history. A licensed attorney as the legal backbone, and a woman in a gray coat who moved between the management level and the building level as a direct operative. This isn't Denver, Ryan said. It's not even Colorado. No, Caleb said. It's a regional operation, maybe larger. He looked at Ethan. Your detective needs to know the federal dimension before she moves. If she pursues it as a local financial crimes case, she might get Derek Voss and lose everything above him. This needs a coordinated approach. Local, JAG, potentially FBI financial crimes. Ethan was already dialing Sterling. She answered on the first ring. I was about to call you, she said, without greeting. I identified the woman in the gray coat. He stopped. Who is she? Her name is Patricia Reeve. She has a background in financial compliance consulting, and her name appears as an officer, not a registered agent, an actual officer of the Wyoming parent company. A pause, and in the pause, Ethan could hear the sound of her thinking, which means she's not just Harlow's messenger. She's a co-principal in the parent entity. Sterling, Ethan said, I have someone here with a federal angle that changes your timeline. A very brief silence. How federal? JAG fraud. Monitoring flagged 47 military pension accounts in 3 states. Pattern matches what we've been describing. The analyst has been trying to identify the operation for 4 months. The silence this time was longer. When Sterling spoke, her voice had the particular flatness of someone recalibrating the entire scope of something they thought they understood. I need to make a call, she said. I know. And then we're going to need to meet again today. All of us. Bring your JAG contact if she can get here. A pause. And Mr. Cross, I'm going to say something that I want you to take seriously. The moment this becomes a multi-agency case, there will be pressure to move quickly before the structure dissolves. Harlow will hear something is moving. Lawyers always do. And when she does, the first thing that organization will do is pressure the witnesses. Ethan thought about Walter, about Antonio Guzman's door opening with the man's weight shifted to the right, left arm behind him. How quickly, he said. Days, Sterling said. Maybe less. She ended the call. Ethan turned to Caleb and Ryan. He didn't need to explain what he'd heard. They'd both been in rooms where timelines compressed without warning, where the moment between planning and having to act was shorter than anyone wanted. I need to get Walter, Harriet, and Antonio out of that building tonight, Ethan said. On what basis? Caleb said. Not arguing. Asking. On the basis that Patricia Reeve came to that building last night, and now she's been identified as a principal in the parent entity, and the window between now and when Harlow learns this is being looked at is not wide enough to gamble with 3 elderly veterans' safety. Ryan was already standing. Where would they go? I know a place, Caleb said. My cousin has a house in Aurora. She's traveling. I have a key. Ethan's phone buzzed. A text from Walter. Someone just rang my buzzer. Not the intercom, the in-building buzzer. No name given. I did not answer. But Ethan, I can hear someone on my floor. Ethan was moving before he finished reading. He was out the door and down the stairs and into his truck in under 90 seconds. Lena jumping into the back without being told, and he had the address on Colfax locked in as he pulled out of the lot. And he was 6 blocks away when his phone rang again. Not Walter. The number was unlisted. He answered anyway. Mr. Cross? A woman's voice. Measured and careful and precise in a way that had nothing to do with consideration and everything to do with control. My name isn't relevant right now. What is relevant is that you've been spending a lot of time outside a building on Colfax Avenue, and I think you should know that some of the people in that building have made very unfortunate financial decisions that could have significant legal consequences. Ethan drove. His hands were steady. I don't know what you're referring to, he said. I think you do. A pause. I also think you're the kind of man who responds well to clarity, so let me be clear. What's happening with the residents of that building is a legal debt collection matter. Any interference in a lawful commercial process could expose you to liability. Another pause. The pause of someone who uses silence as punctuation. And any individuals who've been speaking with you should understand that cooperation with external parties who don't understand the full contractual situation could complicate their existing arrangements considerably. She was threatening the witnesses, over the phone, to him, directly, which meant either she was panicking or she was supremely confident that this call wasn't being recorded and would never be admissible. Ethan thought about what Caleb had said. When she does, the first thing that organization will do is pressure the witnesses. He turned on to Colfax. The building was 2 blocks ahead. I appreciate the clarity, Ethan said. Good, the woman said. I have some clarity of my own, he said. Patricia Reeve was identified by Denver PD this morning as an officer of the Wyoming parent company. Detective Maya Sterling of Denver Financial Crimes has your LLC structure, the Breck Connection, the Halcyon Parallel Operation, and a JAG fraud analyst who flagged 47 pension accounts across 3 states. He pulled up in front of the building. The next call you make probably shouldn't be to me. A silence that was different from the previous silences. Not calculated, actual. He ended the call, got out of the truck, and pushed through the front door of the building at a pace that was just short of running. The lobby was empty. The elevator was on the 3rd floor, not moving. Ethan took the stairs. He came out on the 3rd floor and the hallway was empty too, except for the door to Walter's apartment, which was standing 6 inches open when Ethan had never once seen Walter leave his door open, not even for a moment, not even in the warmest part of the afternoon. Lena went rigid at his left. He put his back to the wall beside the door, listened for 3 seconds, heard nothing, and pushed it open the rest of the way. Walter Hayes was sitting in his kitchen chair, upright, hands flat on the table, jaw set. And across the small room, standing between the kitchen and the window, was Derek Voss. He was exactly as Harriet had described, 45, maybe 46, 6'1", heavy but solid, and he had the ease in his posture of someone who is used to being the largest and most confident presence in small rooms. He held a manila envelope in one hand, and he'd clearly been in the middle of something when the door opened. He looked at Ethan, at Lena. Wrong apartment, Derek said. My friend didn't buzz me up, Ethan said. He usually buzzes me up. A silence in which several things happened. Walter's jaw tightened by a fraction. Derek's left hand moved toward his jacket pocket and then didn't complete the movement. Lena made no sound, but her weight shifted forward by about 2 degrees. Leave, Derek said. Is that the envelope with the new payment amount? Ethan said, looking at the manila envelope. The $800 one. Something changed in Derek's expression. The ease didn't disappear. Men like Derek didn't let it disappear. It was load-bearing. But underneath it, something moved, like a foundation settling. Who are you? Derek said. And before Ethan could answer, his phone rang in his jacket pocket. He reached for it and saw the screen. Sterling. He answered it without taking his eyes off Derek Voss. Detective. Sterling's voice came through clear and immediate. I need you to know that I have a warrant moving through the system right now for Derek Voss. I also have federal coordination on Harlow and Reeve. But Ethan, I need a location on Voss. Now. Ethan looked at Derek Voss standing in Walter Hayes' kitchen. He's with me, Ethan said. Derek Voss made his decision in the space of about 2 seconds. Ethan could see it happening. The calculation running behind the man's eyes, the assessment of the room, the door, the dog, the phone in Ethan's hand with Sterling's voice coming through it. Derek was not a stupid man. That was the thing about men who built operations like this. They didn't survive 3 years and 47 flagged victims by being stupid. They survived by knowing when a room had turned against them and moving before the turn completed. He moved left toward the window side of the kitchen, which put Walter's table between him and Ethan, and his hand went fully into his jacket pocket this time. Lena didn't bark. She stepped forward and dropped her weight into a stance that was not aggressive in any theatrical sense. No snarl, no raised hackles, just the particular density of a working dog that has shifted from observation to readiness. And it was the kind of thing that stopped people who'd never seen it before, because it looked like the dog had simply become more present in the room. Derek stopped. "Don't," Ethan said. One word. The tone that went with it was not a threat. It was information. Sterling's voice through the phone. "Ethan, talk to me." "Subject is in the apartment," Ethan said into the phone, not taking his eyes off Derek. "Third floor, 3C, Colfax address I sent you this morning. He appears to be deciding something." A beat. Then Sterling. "I have 2 units 4 minutes out. Do not engage physically." "Understood." He lowered the phone but didn't pocket it. He looked at Derek. "Sit down." "I'm not sitting down," Derek said. His voice had lost the ease that had been in it when Ethan came through the door. What was underneath was harder and less polished, the actual voice, probably, beneath the management layer. "I came here for a legal business matter. I have documentation. You have no authority to tell me anything." "You're right," Ethan said. "Sit down anyway." Derek looked at Lena. Then at Walter, who had not moved from his chair and was watching the exchange with the stillness of someone who has waited a very long time for a specific moment and is not going to waste it by moving incorrectly. "Whatever you think you've done," Derek said, and his voice had taken on a different quality. Not scared, but tight, like something pressurized. "You don't understand what you're dealing with. This isn't just me. There are legal structures in place. There are—" "Patricia Reeve," Ethan said. Derek's mouth closed. "And V. Harlow," Ethan said, "and Thomas Breck, and a Wyoming parent company that's 3 years old and sits above Meridian and Halcyon both." He paused. "That's what Detective Sterling has, along with 47 flagged pension accounts across 3 states, and a JAG fraud analyst who's been looking for your corporate backbone for 4 months." The envelope in Derek's hand, the one with the $800 demand, had gone slack in his grip. Walter Hayes, from his chair at the kitchen table, said something then. He said it quietly, without raising his voice, in the tone of a man who has had a great many things to say for a very long time and has chosen this particular sentence carefully. "You told me once," Walter said, looking at Derek, "that it didn't matter where I went. You said that like it was supposed to terrify me." He paused. "Sit down." Derek Voss sat down. He sat in the chair near the window that Walter sometimes used for reading, and he sat the way men sit when something structural has given way. Not collapsed, but settling, adjusting to a new configuration of weight. The envelope went on the table. He put his hands on his knees and looked at the middle distance. They waited 4 minutes in silence. The silence had a texture to it. Not comfortable, not dramatic, just the particular quiet of a room where something has ended and the paperwork hasn't caught up yet. The knock at the door, when it came, was 3 sharp raps. Ethan opened it. 2 uniformed officers in the hallway, and behind them, Maya Sterling in a dark jacket with her badge at her belt, her satchel over one shoulder, her expression the professional version of someone who has been running toward this for 6 months and is not going to let arrival look like relief. She looked past Ethan at Derek Voss in the chair, at the envelope on Walter's kitchen table. "Mr. Voss," she said. Derek looked at her. "I'm going to need that envelope," she said. The next 3 hours were procedural and unglamorous, and nothing like what television suggested, which is to say they were exhausting and full of forms and involved a great deal of waiting in hallways. Derek was placed under arrest in Walter's apartment, extortion, fraud, and a holding charge on the wire fraud angle pending the federal piece, and walked out of the building through the lobby at 4:15 in the afternoon. 2 residents Ethan didn't know were in the lobby when it happened. An older woman with a grocery bag who stopped and watched Derek go past with his hands cuffed behind him, and a young man near the mailboxes who took out his phone. Neither of them knew specifically what they were seeing, but they watched. That was the thing. They watched, which meant it was witnessed, which meant it existed in the world beyond the controlled environment of Walter's kitchen and Sterling's case file. Ethan stood in the lobby doorway and watched the patrol car pull away, and then he went back upstairs. Sterling was in Walter's apartment with a second detective Ethan hadn't met, a man named Okafor, no relation to Harriet, going through the documentation Ethan had assembled the night before in the diner. Ryan was at the kitchen table answering questions with the careful precision of someone who knows how evidence chains work and wants his piece of it to hold. Caleb had gone to get Antonio Guzman from the first floor, who had agreed to give a formal statement with the particular dignity of a man who has been waiting for someone to ask. Walter was standing at his kitchen counter making coffee, not for any visitor in particular, just making it, moving through the steps of it with a focus that suggested he needed something specific and ordinary to do with his hands. Ethan stood near him without saying anything for a moment. "You okay?" Ethan asked. Walter considered the question with apparent seriousness. "I don't know yet," he said. "Ask me in a week." He poured water into the machine. "His face," he said, not looking up. "When you said Harlow's name, I've been trying to remember if I've ever seen him look like that before." A pause. "I haven't." "No," Ethan said. "You wouldn't have." "How did you know the name would land like that?" "I didn't," Ethan said. "I was buying 4 minutes." Walter looked at him sideways. Something that was not quite a smile crossed his face and moved on. "Well," he said, "it worked." Sterling found Ethan at 6:30 in the building's front stoop, where he'd gone to get Lena outside after 4 hours in the apartment. The temperature had dropped and the street had the specific quiet of a Denver winter evening. Traffic sounds muffled by distance, the cold pressing everything down. She stood beside him on the step and didn't speak for a moment, which Ethan appreciated about her. "Derek Voss is cooperating," she said finally. Ethan looked at her. "Faster than I expected," she said. "His lawyer made one call, heard the federal dimension, and apparently advised cooperation." A pause. "He's given us Patricia Reeves' direct line and confirmed she's an operational officer. He's also confirmed that V. Harlow is not a passive registered agent. She structured the debt instruments personally. The fraudulent occupancy agreements, the manufactured debt collection notices, those are her legal work product. So, Harlow's insulation is gone." "Significantly compromised," Sterling said, in the careful language of someone who doesn't use words like "gone" until a verdict comes back. "Reeve is a different situation. Reeve hasn't been located yet. As of this afternoon, she's not responding to her known numbers, and there's no activity on her registered vehicle." Ethan absorbed that. "She made the call to me before I went upstairs. She knew something was moving." "Yes, which means she had maybe a 20-minute head start." Sterling looked at the street. "We have alerts out. She doesn't have anywhere that's actually safe to go. Too much of the financial trail runs through accounts she has signatory access to, which means we can trace her movement through transactions. But tonight, she's a loose piece." Ethan thought about Reeve, about the way she'd stood in the hallway on the second floor, reading the situation from Lena's vest and Ethan's posture. The woman who had called him in the truck and delivered a threat with the precision of someone who did it professionally. "She's not running," he said. Sterling looked at him. "She's too controlled to run without a plan," he said. "She's regrouping, finding out what Derek gave up, calculating what the damage is, figuring out if there's anything left to protect." He paused. "She'll surface when she's decided what she's protecting." Sterling looked at him for a moment with the expression of someone who is evaluating whether to agree or push back, and then she did neither. "I've got people on the Wyoming entity," she said. "Harlow's office was notified of a subpoena about 2 hours ago. Her assistant said she's in meetings and unavailable." A pause with dry weight in it. "Sure she is." "What do you need from Walter and the others now?" "Formal depositions scheduled through the week. Harriet Okafor's documentation on the occupancy agreement is particularly strong. If that's Harlow's legal work, it's a direct tie, she paused. And the fourth victim I mentioned, the one who died. Her daughter? I need to tell her tonight that this is moving. She said it matter-of-factly, but the matter-of-fact had something underneath it. That's not a call I enjoy making. Ethan didn't say anything to that. There wasn't anything to say that would be worth saying. Thank you, Sterling said, and she said it the way people say it when they mean it specifically and don't want it to become a moment. The LLC connector, the Breck name, that was the 6 months I was missing. Ryan found it in an evening. Ryan had context I didn't, she said. He knew what building to look at. She picked up her satchel. I'll be in touch tomorrow. Keep your phone on. She went back inside. Caleb left for his cousin's house in Aurora at 9 that evening. He'd offered the safe house, and it wasn't needed now. Derek in custody changed the immediate risk calculus. But before he left, he sat with Ethan in the cab of the truck for 10 minutes, and they talked about logistics the way former military men talk about logistics, which is to say, practically and without drama. The federal piece is going to take time, Caleb said. JAG fraud cases don't move fast. The coordination between Sterling's office and the federal level is going to involve bureaucratic negotiation that could stretch this by weeks. I know. And Harlow's going to lawyer up with someone very good and make this difficult on the evidentiary side. I know. Are you going to be okay with not being in the room for any of that? Caleb asked. Ethan thought about it honestly. I don't need to be in the room. Caleb looked at him in the way of someone who has known a person long enough to know when they're being truthful and when they're performing truthfulness. He seemed to conclude it was the former. Okay, he said. They shook hands. Caleb drove north toward Aurora. Ryan left an hour later with 3 folders of documentation and a handshake agreement with Sterling's office to be available for questions. He looked tired in the specific way of someone who had done good work under time pressure and hadn't stopped to feel it yet. You need anything before I drive back? He asked. Sleep, Ethan said. Same. Ryan put his bag in his car and then stopped with his hand on the door. 47 accounts, he said. Across 3 states, for 3 years. He looked at Ethan. How long do you think it would have kept going? Ethan didn't answer right away. He thought about the structure, the legal architecture, the corporate layering, the systematic identification of vulnerable people in buildings that housed them specifically because they couldn't afford anything else. He thought about Raymond on the 3rd floor, who had died in September and been described as quiet in a way that wasn't like him. Long enough, Ethan said. Ryan nodded. He got in his car and drove north. The week that followed was a specific kind of slow that Ethan hadn't expected. Not slow because nothing was happening, but slow because everything that was happening in rooms he wasn't in, through channels he wasn't part of, driven by processes that moved on their own time. Sterling called twice. Once to tell him that Vivian Harlow, the full name, it turned out, was Vivian, had retained a defense attorney from a White Shoe Denver firm and was declining all contact with investigators. Once to tell him that the Wyoming entity had been frozen by federal order and that 3 secondary accounts linked to Meridian had been identified and flagged. Reeve remained unlocated. That detail sat in the background of Ethan's days like a splinter he couldn't quite reach. Everything else had a location, a status, a legal process attached to it. Reeve was still a variable. He checked on Walter every afternoon. Not formally. He'd walk Lena past the building, sometimes stop, sometimes not. Walter had started coming down to the lobby around 4 o'clock, which was new, and twice Ethan had arrived to find him standing outside talking to Antonio Guzman, which was also new. There was something settling about Walter in the afternoons that hadn't been there the week before. Not happiness exactly, something more durable than that. On Thursday, Harriet Okafor gave her formal deposition. She had brought every piece of paper she owned relating to the occupancy agreement, the original, her copy, 2 follow-up notices from Meridian, and a handwritten note she'd made to herself the night she signed it that said, in neat Air Force precise block letters, "Read this more carefully. Something wrong." The detective taking her statement had been quiet for a moment when she put it on the table. On Friday, Ethan got a call from a number he didn't recognize. He answered. "Mr. Cross." A man's voice. Not Derek, not anyone he'd spoken to. Professional, clipped, with the particular rhythm of someone reading from something. "My name is Special Agent Dennis Farr, FBI Financial Crimes. I've been briefed by Detective Sterling's office and by the JAG fraud unit on the Colorado operation. I'd like to meet with you Monday." "Sure," Ethan said. "I want to be straightforward with you about the scope of what we're looking at," Farr said. "What you helped identify in Denver is the largest geographic cluster of what we believe is a significantly larger national pattern. We have incidents matching this profile in New Mexico, Utah, Nevada, and 2 cases in Texas that we're now re-examining." A pause. "The Wyoming parent company isn't the top of the structure." Ethan stood very still. "How far up does it go?" he said. "That's what we're working on," Farr said. "Monday at 9, if you're available." He didn't tell Walter about the FBI call on Friday. He didn't tell Walter on Saturday either. He told him Sunday afternoon, sitting at the kitchen table in Walter's apartment with 2 cups of coffee that Walter had made without asking if Ethan wanted any, which was itself a change. A small one, the kind that only registers when you've been paying attention to the before. Walter listened to the whole thing without interrupting. When Ethan finished, Walter was quiet for a moment. He looked at his coffee cup. Then he said, "National." That's what Farr said. "How many people?" "He didn't give me a number." Walter looked at the wall. At the Pacific map, the Pacific he'd served in a long time ago, the Pacific that was still there and still the same whether anything else was or not. "Raymond," he said. Ethan waited. "He told me once," Walter said, "that he'd gotten a letter about a debt from his son's estate. His son died in 2019, and he didn't know what to do about it. I told him to call a lawyer." He stopped. "I didn't follow up. I got busy with my own situation, and I didn't follow up." He paused. "If Raymond's death is connected to this—" "It may not be," Ethan said. "We don't know. But it may be." Ethan didn't answer that with anything that wasn't true. "Yes," he said. "It may be." Walter's hands were on the table. They were steadier than they'd been the first night at the grocery store, which Ethan had noticed but not mentioned. They weren't steady now. "I should have pushed harder," Walter said, "when he went quiet, when he stopped coming to building events. I noticed it, and I thought about it, and I didn't push." "You were being extorted yourself," Ethan said. "That's not an excuse." "It's not," Ethan agreed, "but it's true." Walter was quiet for a long time. Outside, the Sunday afternoon traffic on Colfax made its Sunday sounds, lighter than weekday, the particular tempo of the city on a day with less urgency. "What happens Monday?" Walter said. "I go to the FBI and I tell them everything I have. Sterling will be there. Ryan's sending his documentation directly." He paused. "They may want to talk to you again. Farr's team." "Fine." Walter picked up his coffee. "Let them." The FBI field office on Monday morning was on the 6th floor of a building downtown that smelled like recycled air and new carpet, and Special Agent Farr was 48, methodical, and had the look of someone who had been working the same general category of crime for long enough that he'd stopped being surprised by its dimensions without becoming indifferent to its effects. He laid out what the Bureau had across 12 states in under 20 minutes, with a precision that Sterling, sitting to Ethan's left, matched with her own case files, and by 10:15 in the morning the room had a documented picture of something that ran from Denver to Dallas to Sacramento, touching affordable senior housing developments in cities that had been selected, Farr said, specifically because they had high concentrations of veterans who had no one professionally positioned to advocate for them. "The Wyoming parent is a mid-level entity," Farr said. "Above it there are 2 additional layers. We've identified the second layer through the Breck-Harlow connection. The third is still developing." He looked at Ethan. "Your intervention accelerated our timeline by what I'd estimate is 3 months." "Because of the LLC connection," Ethan said. "Because the LLC connection gave us Breck. Breck gave us the Wyoming entity, And the Wyoming entity is the first geographic anchor we've had in 9 months of tracking this. He paused. The operation has been structured deliberately to avoid looking like one operation. Each city looks like a local property management company with local debt issues. It's only when you have the corporate backbone that you see it's the same hands. Sterling looked at the documents in front of her. Harlow structured it that way. Harlow built the legal skeleton, Farr said. But Harlow didn't design the business model. That came from above her. He paused. We believe the architect of the overall model has no criminal record, no prior contact with law enforcement, and has maintained complete distance from any operational activity. Everything runs through attorneys, through LLCs, through people like Reeve and Harlow who carry legal credentials. Which is why you haven't been able to reach the top, Sterling said. Which is why we haven't been able to reach the top, Farr confirmed. The room was quiet for a moment. Patricia Reeve, Ethan said. Still no location? We had a transaction hit Friday evening, Farr said. Gas station near Colorado Springs. Single purchase. The account it drew from has since been closed. He looked at his notes. She's mobile, but she's not organized. She left in a hurry. She's trying to reach the person at the top, Ethan said. She knows that's the only play left. Get to the architect and either get cover or get out of the country with resources she doesn't currently control. Farr looked at him with the expression of someone who has thought the same thing and doesn't want to confirm it in a way that sounds like agreement before he's assessed the reasoning. That's our working assumption, he said. Which means, Sterling said, that if she gets there before you do, the person at the top may help her disappear, Farr said, or may decide she's a liability. He said the second option with the flatness of someone who has seen that outcome before and is not dramatizing it. We need her before she makes contact. Ethan thought about Reeve in the hallway, about the phone call in the truck, about the controlled precision of a woman who made threats with the confidence of someone who believed the structure above her was permanent. That structure was cracking from the bottom up. Derek was cooperating. Harlow was subpoenaed. The Wyoming entity was frozen. Reeve, somewhere between Colorado Springs and wherever she was going, was the last moving piece. And the person at the top, whoever had designed 3 years of systematic exploitation of veterans living on fixed pensions, who had built legal cover and corporate distance and a pipeline that turned grief and isolation into a revenue model, was somewhere Farr hadn't reached yet, watching the structure come apart and calculating their own options. Ethan's phone buzzed on the conference room table, a text from a number he didn't have saved. The message was 4 words. I know where she is. He turned the phone over so Sterling and Farr could read it. Sterling reached for her radio. Farr was already on his phone. Ethan looked at the 4 words on the screen and thought about who had this number, who had the specific combination of knowledge and motive to send exactly this message at exactly this moment, and landed on the one name that made the geometry work. The number was Walter Hayes's number. Ethan called Walter back before Farr finished his sentence. Walter picked up on the first ring. Where? Ethan said. The VFW post on Alameda. Walter's voice was steady, but there was something moving underneath it. Not panic, the opposite of panic. The voice of a man who has decided on a course of action and is past the part where he second-guesses it. She came in about 40 minutes ago. I recognized her from the hallway. She's sitting in the back corner with a bag, been on her phone since she sat down. Walter, how are you at the VFW right now? A pause. I come here on Mondays. I've come here on Mondays for 6 years. Another pause. She didn't recognize me. I'm just an old man at a bar. Ethan had his hand over the phone and was giving Farr the address and the details simultaneously. Farr was already moving, Sterling was on her radio, and the conference room that had been procedural and still 60 seconds ago was reorganizing itself around a point of action. Don't approach her, Ethan said into the phone. Don't look at her more than you normally would. Just stay where you are. I know how to do this, Walter said, and the quiet confidence in that sentence was not a boast. It was a man with 31 years of naval service reminding someone that he had been in operational situations before and had not, in fact, needed to be told how to behave in them. I know you do, Ethan said. I'll be there in 12 minutes. He wasn't. He was there in 9. Mark. The VFW post on Alameda was the kind of place that looked closed from the outside even when it was open. A low brick building with a parking lot that needed resurfacing and a flagpole out front that held its flag with a dignity the building itself wasn't quite keeping up with. Inside it was warmer than the street and darker than daylight, and it smelled like every VFW post Ethan had ever been in: coffee and old wood and something that was either cleaner or the memory of cleaner. He left Lena in the truck. He didn't want Reeve to see the dog and remember the hallway. He walked in like he was meeting someone, which he was, and he found Walter at the bar on a stool with a coffee cup in front of him, positioned at an angle that gave him a natural sightline to the back corner without requiring him to turn his head. When Ethan sat down 2 stools away, Walter didn't look at him directly, just said quietly, "Far left table, blue jacket." Ethan ordered coffee from the bartender and let his eyes adjust to the light and drift across the room the way eyes do when someone is simply waiting for a friend. Patricia Reeve was at the far left table with her back to the wall, which was instinct or training or both. She had a canvas bag on the chair beside her and a phone in her hand, and she was not reading the phone. She was waiting for it. Her jaw was set, and her posture was controlled, and there were shadows under her eyes that hadn't been there in the building hallway 5 days ago. Farr had asked Ethan to keep her in location. 2 agents were 4 minutes out. Sterling was coming from a different direction. Ethan drank his coffee. From the corner of his eye, he saw Walter's hand around his coffee cup, and the hand was not shaking. He noticed that and said nothing about it. 3 minutes passed. Reeve's phone lit up. She looked at it, and her expression changed. Not relief, something more complicated. She started typing. The door of the VFW opened. Not Farr's people. A man Ethan didn't know, 50s, in a heavy coat, who looked across the room, found Reeve in the corner, and walked toward her with the directed purpose of someone who has been told exactly where to go. Ethan set his coffee cup down. The man sat across from Reeve and leaned forward and spoke to her in a low voice that didn't carry. And Reeve's face did something in response that Ethan read as a mixture of relief and fear, which was a specific combination that meant she had reached someone who had the resources she needed and was now finding out the cost of those resources. This was the contact. The person above Reeve in the structure, or the emissary of the person above her. Either way, this was the thread that led somewhere the FBI hadn't been yet. Ethan texted Farr without looking at his phone. Second subject arrived. Male, 50s, heavy coat, seated with Reeve now. You need to take both. The reply came back in under 30 seconds, 90 seconds. Ethan kept his eyes forward. Beside him, Walter was still and quiet. You doing okay? Ethan said, barely above a murmur. Ask me later, Walter said. 90 seconds is a long time when you're counting it. Ethan didn't count it. He focused on the bartender refilling his cup and the low sound of a television somewhere, and the particular quality of the air in a room where most of the people present had served somewhere difficult and come home changed and found this place because it required nothing to be explained. The door opened. Farr came in first, which Ethan hadn't expected. He'd expected the agents to enter first and Farr to coordinate from outside. But Farr moved like someone who had decided the situation required his presence directly, and behind him came 2 agents and Sterling, and they crossed the room with the specific efficiency of people who know exactly where they're going and have agreed on the spacing. Reeve saw them at the same moment the man in the heavy coat did. The man stood up. One of the agents was already positioned to his right and said something to him. Short, clear, the tone that closes options, and the man looked at the agent, at Farr, at Reeve, and made the calculation that people make when they understand the mathematics of a room have just changed permanently. He sat back down. Reeve didn't run, which Ethan had half expected. She sat very still and watched Farr come toward her table, and when he reached it and introduced himself with his credentials, her expression was the specific blankness of someone who has been running a scenario in their head and has just arrived at the moment where the scenario ends. Patricia Reeve, Farr said, I need you to come with me. She looked at the man across the table from her. He was not looking back at her. He was looking at the agent beside him with the expression of someone who has already made their next calculation, which told Ethan something about the kind of loyalty the upper structure maintained with the people below it. Reeve looked at Farr. "I want an attorney," she said. "That's your right," Farr said. "Let's go." She stood. She picked up her bag and then one of the agents took it from her gently, and she let it go. And she walked out of the VFW post on Alameda between Farr and the second agent with her head level and her jaw still set, and whatever she was feeling she kept it internal, which was, even now, a kind of discipline. The man in the heavy coat was walked out separately. The whole thing, from the agents entering to both subjects in custody, took under 4 minutes. The VFW post settled back into its Monday morning quiet. The bartender stood behind the bar with the expression of a man who had seen a few things in his years and was going to add this to the collection without making a production of it. Walter Hayes was still on his stool. He set his coffee cup down precisely on the ring it had made on the bar and looked at the back corner table, now empty, and didn't say anything for a long moment. Then he said, "Who was the man in the coat?" "I don't know yet," Ethan said, "but he came when she called, which means he's connected to whatever is above her." "Will they find out how far up it goes?" Ethan thought about what Farr had said in the conference room. The third layer, still developing, the architect with no criminal record and complete operational distance. He thought about the honesty that Walter deserved versus the reassurance that was easier. "Farr's good," Ethan said, "and now he has Reeve and whoever that man is. That's 2 more threads." He paused. "It takes time, but yeah, I think they'll get there." Walter nodded slowly. He picked up his coffee. It was empty. He set it down again. 7 months, he said, not bitterly, just naming the length of a thing. "Yeah," Ethan said. "And the whole time, the whole 7 months, I kept thinking that if I just kept paying, if I just stayed quiet, if I just made it manageable." He stopped. "I kept thinking I was protecting my son, that the smart move was to keep it contained." He looked at his hands. "I was just making it easier for them." "You didn't know the size of it," Ethan said. "No." Walter turned to look at him directly, which was something he did rarely and with deliberate weight when he did it. "You did. Or you suspected. After one night." "I had Lena," Ethan said. Walter looked at him with an expression that was too tired for argument but too honest for agreement. "That's not why," he said. Ethan didn't answer that, because Walter was right that it wasn't the whole reason, and because the full reason was something Ethan had never found a way to articulate that didn't sound like something off a motivational poster, which was not a register he was comfortable with. He left it alone. Some things don't need to be named to be understood. The weeks that followed moved differently than the week before them. Vivian Harlow was indicted on 12 counts, including wire fraud, conspiracy, and the production of fraudulent legal instruments. Her attorney filed 3 motions in the first week, all of which were denied. The Colorado State Bar opened a parallel disciplinary proceeding that, regardless of the criminal outcome, would end her legal career. Ethan read about it in a Denver Post article that Sterling texted him at 7 in the morning with no message attached, just the link. Derek Voss pleaded guilty to 4 counts in exchange for cooperation testimony. His sentencing was scheduled for the following spring. The cooperation agreement meant he would serve time. The question was how much, and that was now a matter for prosecutors and judges in a room Ethan wasn't in, which was exactly where it should be. The man in the heavy coat from the VFW turned out to be a financial manager named Gerald Sutton, who had no prior record and a law-abiding paper trail going back 30 years, which was precisely what Farr had described as the profile of the architect level, and who, under 3 days of questioning with his attorney present, began to describe the person above him in terms that Farr, in a brief call to Ethan, characterized only as useful. Sutton was charged federally. His assets were frozen within a week. Patricia Reeve cooperated on the second day, which surprised Ethan slightly, and from Farr's tone, didn't surprise Farr at all. She gave detailed operational testimony about the structure above her in exchange for a reduced charge agreement, and the picture she described of a deliberately constructed system that had been expanding for 4 years across 14 states before Denver became a pressure point was the foundation of a federal indictment that would eventually name 9 individuals across 4 states. The architect, it turned out, was a woman named Lois Vander, 63, a former real estate developer in Phoenix, who had repositioned herself as a senior housing consultant after a financial collapse in 2017. She had no criminal record. She gave interviews to real estate trade publications. She had a professionally maintained LinkedIn profile and a reputation in her industry as an innovative thinker on affordable housing solutions. She was arrested at her home in Scottsdale on a Tuesday morning in February, 7 weeks after a retired Navy K-9 handler had stayed in his truck outside a building on Colfax and photographed a license plate because his dog had looked at an old man in a grocery store with something like recognition. Ethan read about Vander's arrest the same way he'd read about Harlow's indictment, on his phone early in the morning, with Lena at his feet and a coffee going cold on the counter. The article had a photograph. Lander looked like what she was, a businesswoman in a good coat, taken by surprise by the presence of cameras at her own front door. Her expression the particular blankness of someone whose plan included everything except being seen. He sent the article to Walter with no message. Walter replied 20 minutes later with 2 words: "Good morning." The formal recognition happened in March, on a Thursday, at a reception in a conference room at Denver PD that Sterling had arranged with the specific understated efficiency she brought to everything. Enough chairs, decent coffee, no podium, no speeches longer than 2 minutes. The city's Victim Services Division was there, and a representative from the VA and the JAG fraud analyst, a woman named Lieutenant Colonel Dina Fitch, who had driven down from the Colorado Springs base and shook Ethan's hand with the grip of someone who genuinely meant what they were saying with it. Ryan was there. Caleb had sent a message saying he couldn't make it, but to call him after, which was Caleb's version of attending. Walter came with Harriet and Antonio. They arrived together, which was new and not new. They'd been arriving together at building events for 6 weeks, a habit that had grown out of proximity and shared experience and the specific solidarity of people who have been through something together and stopped pretending they hadn't. Antonio Guzman's left forearm, the one with the old bruise, had healed. He shook Ethan's hand and said, "My daughter wants to thank you. I told her you'd be embarrassed about it." "I would be," Ethan said. "I told her that too," Antonio said, and something in his expression was the closest thing to light Ethan had seen from him. There was a certificate. Sterling presented it with the self-consciousness of someone who is good at investigations and less good at ceremonies, which made it better than if she'd been practiced at it. The certificate recognized Ethan's contribution to the investigation in terms that were formal and accurate and missed most of what had actually happened, which is always true of certificates. Ethan took it and said, "Thank you," and meant it specifically for the investigation, not the paper. Sterling looked at him with the expression of someone who knows the difference and appreciated it. There were remarks from the VA representative about the scope of the case, 49 confirmed victims in Colorado alone, with the federal case expanding the count significantly. There were remarks from Lieutenant Colonel Fitch about the pension monitoring program and what the case had meant for the flagged accounts. There were numbers, and the numbers were large. And when you held them next to the image of Walter Hayes at Register 4 with a 6-cent shortfall, the distance between the scale of the crime and the scale of the moment where it became visible was almost impossible to reconcile. Ethan stood at the edge of the room with Lena at his heel and didn't try to reconcile it. Toward the end of the reception, Walter found him there. He had a coffee cup in his hand, and he stood beside Ethan in the particular way of 2 people who don't need to position themselves to have a conversation, just side by side, looking at the room. "Your son," Ethan said. It was the first time he'd raised it since that first night at Brackett's Diner. "The documentation Derek had," Walter said. "The federal piece. When they got into Meridian's files, they found what he'd been using on me." A pause. Sterling's office looked at it. It was real. There was a situation. My son made some decisions 2 years ago that weren't good. But Derek had overstated the federal exposure significantly. What was there was manageable. He stopped. "My son has a lawyer now. A real one. We're working through it." "Good," Ethan said. "I called him the night Derek was arrested," Walter said. "First time we'd talked in about 8 months." He looked at his coffee. "It was a hard conversation. There are things between us that the legal situation didn't cause and isn't going to fix," he paused. "But we're talking." Ethan nodded. "That's enough for now," Walter said. "Talking is enough." They stood there a while longer. Across the room, Harriet Okafor was speaking with Lieutenant Colonel Fitch, with the focused energy of a retired Air Force logistics officer who has found another military person to trade institutional experience with, and the conversation had the quality of two professionals recognizing each other across the civilian divide. Antonio was at the coffee table, his posture more open than Ethan had ever seen it, telling Ryan something that had Ryan's full attention. "You're going to keep doing this," Walter said. It wasn't a question. "Doing what?" "Whatever it is you do." Walter looked at him. "The thing where you notice something that most people would walk past." Ethan thought about a grocery store on a Tuesday night, about a woman named Dee in an orange booth diner refilling coffee without being asked, about a license plate photographed from a truck cab in the cold, and a whiteboard with arrows connecting names, and a conference room where the lines between a local shakedown and a 14-state operation came into focus one piece at a time. "I don't have a plan for it," Ethan said. "No," Walter said. "I don't imagine you do. It just—" Ethan stopped, tried again. "Some things, you walk past them and you know you're going to be thinking about them for the next 3 days, so it's easier to stop." Walter was quiet for a moment. "Raymond," he said. Ethan waited. "I've been thinking about Raymond," Walter said. "About the fact that what happened to him, what we think happened because no one stopped." He paused. "I didn't stop. I was too deep in my own situation to stop and knock on his door and say, 'Raymond, you've been quiet for 6 months and that isn't like you.'" He looked at the room. "That's something I'm going to have to live with." "Yes," Ethan said, "because there was nothing else to say that was true. And I'm going to live with it by doing what you do," Walter said. "Stopping. When something's wrong." He paused. "There's a woman in my building, moved in 2 months ago. 81, comes from Alabama, doesn't know many people here yet. She smiles when she sees people and then goes into her apartment, and that's the last you see of her." He looked at Lena. "I've been bringing her coffee on Wednesday mornings." "How's that going?" Ethan said. "She talks," Walter said. "Once you sit down and give her a reason to, she talks." Something moved across his face that wasn't quite a smile, but occupied the same territory. "Her name is Frances. She was a school librarian for 40 years. She knows things about books that I will never understand, and she tells me about them whether I ask or not." Ethan looked at him. "It helps," Walter said simply. "Doing something. It helps." He drove home from the reception with the certificate on the passenger seat and Lena in the back. And he took the long way because the long way went past Brackett's Diner, which was open and lit and had a Tuesday night quality to it even on a Thursday. And he didn't stop, but he slowed down enough to see Dee behind the counter, and the orange booths, and the coffee carafe on the warmer. He thought about what it cost to stop, not in the dramatic sense, not the hours and the sleep and the favors called in and the FBI conference room. The simpler cost, the one that comes before any of that. The cost of letting something be your problem when it doesn't have to be. The cost of sitting down at a bus stop with a stranger because your dog looked at him in a way that meant something. Most people don't stop. That's not a judgment. It's just true. Most people have enough of their own to carry. Most people have learned over enough years that strangers' situations are strangers' situations, and that getting involved is a way to inherit problems you weren't born with. Ethan had spent a long time after leaving the Navy trying to relearn how to be a person who didn't automatically make other people's problems his own. He'd been moderately successful at it. He had an apartment, he had freelance work, he had a truck and a dog and a reasonable amount of sleep on most nights. And then Lena had stopped in a grocery store and he'd followed her gaze to a man counting pennies, and here he was. He thought, not for the first time, but more clearly than before, that the thing Lena had recognized in Walter wasn't danger exactly. Not threat, not explosive material, not any of the categories she'd been trained on. She'd recognized something more specific and harder to name. She'd recognized a person who was alone with something they shouldn't be alone with. Dogs are better at that than most people are. Ethan didn't know if that said something about dogs or about people. He pulled into his parking lot and sat in the truck for a moment with the engine off. The certificate on the passenger seat had his name and a seal and a date, and the word community in the text, which was the kind of word that could mean almost nothing if you weren't careful about it. He picked it up and looked at it. What it actually meant, as far as he could tell, was this. A 75-year-old veteran had been paying extortion money for 7 months because no one had looked at him carefully enough to see that what was on his face was an embarrassment. And then someone had looked, and then other people had looked, and had made calls and had driven through the night and had put documents together in diner booths and had sat in a VFW post on a Monday morning because that's where they'd been coming for 6 years. And old habits are sometimes exactly the right thing to maintain. And because of all of that looking, 49 people in Colorado and however many in other states now had something they hadn't had before. A case number. A detective. A record that said what happened to them was real and was wrong and was now the documented problem of the people whose job it was to fix it. That wasn't everything. It wasn't Raymond. And it wasn't 7 months of Walter's pension money. And it wasn't the particular way fear had settled into people's bodies over time and would take longer than an arrest to work its way out. But it was something. It was real. And real, Ethan had learned, was the only thing that held. He got out of the truck. Lena jumped out after him and fell into step at his left heel, the way she always had, the way she'd been doing for 11 years, whether they were in a forward operating base or a grocery store or a parking lot in Denver on a Thursday night in March. He thought about Walter's words, the thing where you notice something most people would walk past. He didn't have a plan for it. He'd told Walter that honestly, and it was still true. But plans, he'd found, were mostly just the story you told yourself in advance, so that when the real moment came and looked nothing like the plan, you'd at least practice the posture of being ready. Lena walked beside him to the building door. She wasn't looking at anything in particular. She was just walking, because he was walking, because that's what they did together. Some nights that was enough. Tonight it was more than enough. He went inside. Behind him, the parking lot was quiet and ordinary and completely unremarkable, which was exactly what it was. A parking lot on a Thursday, in a city where 49 people had stopped being invisible and a retired Navy E-8 named Walter Hayes had started bringing coffee to a librarian from Alabama on Wednesday mornings, and where a woman named Lois Vander, who had spent 4 years deciding that elderly veterans on fixed incomes were a market rather than a population of people who deserved to be left alone, was facing the particular and appropriate outcome of having built something that could be dismantled one license plate at a time. The strongest move in the end wasn't tactical. It wasn't legal architecture or corporate structure or the kind of planning that takes years and crosses state lines. It wasn't money or leverage or the cold confidence of someone who believes the people below them are too broken to fight back. The strongest move was a man walking into a grocery store on a Tuesday night and trusting what his dog was telling him. Everything else followed from that.